What's up, guys? Back at it again tonight. I've got my good friend, Steven Nekhaila, who is currently serving as the chair of the Libertarian Party. He's been a friend of mine for a really long time. I've got to know him a lot more over the last, I would say, year or two, serving on that committee with him. Um, he's a very hard worker. He's a very successful man in life outside of political parties. And to be honest with you, he's something we bond over is the topic of Machiavellianism and what that means today, what that meant back then. Big fan of the letters and the prints. But I'm going to bring him up and let him introduce himself. And Steve, what's up, dude? How are you,
Hey,
man?
good man, good. Enjoying this nice 69-degree weather with a nice cool breeze down here in Key West and enjoying a nice cigar outdoors and yeah, man, living
Love
the
it.
dream. At least that's what they say.
Dude, so I guess like what do you do for life? Like obviously you're a very successful man. You don't have to talk about everything, but you also you're chair of the Libertarian Party National Committee, obviously right now, as well, which is something you stumbled upon. But I endorsed you
You
at
did.
DC. Don't forget you were
Thank you.
the email caucus endorsement. I got you. But yeah, like kind of tell us how you got to this path in your life, and then we'll kind of like take that into our regular conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think back in growing up, I was always very inquisitive. Always sort of thought a little bit more philosophically outside the lines and I uh I guess back in the day I watched a documentary called Zeitgeist. Some of you may be familiar with it. More of a conspiracy theory documentary put on by this rocker. Well, it mentioned the Federal Reserve, and I read a book called "The Creature from Jekyll Island" by J. Edward Griffin. Started following his work, really getting into. Really at the time, I was reading a lot of uh, let's see here, Mark Dice, who got really into Freemasonry and secret societies, things like that. Got into a lot of Alex Jones, and then in the course of that, discovered Ron Paul. Um, got into a lot of the work by Jeter Griffin, where he talks about um, individualism versus collectivism, which I thought was a very fascinating topic. I know I wasn't Republican or Democrat. I was an individualist, and I did some journalism growing up. I did some work for We Are Change, Luke Rudowski, in college. Got involved with Young Americans for Liberty at FIU, became a y'all chapter leader for a few semesters. Went to Paul Fest in Tampa in 2012, and I have a little silver coin that I bought there, uh, you know, and discovered the Libertarian Party through that discovery, through getting involved in the Rothbardian circle at FIU, met a bunch of anarcho-capitalists and discovered Mises and Rothbard and really discovered libertarianism as a philosophy. That's what kind of got me started on the path. Joined the party, got a phone call from a friend, Mike Kane, down here in the Keys. Back then, he just making cold calls. Said, "Hey, man, you want to help start the Libertarian Party of the Florida Keys affiliate?" And I'm like, "Hey, not now. I'm still in school, but I can by next year I'll be back. Let's hook up." So we did, and we created the affiliate. Got involved. Then I got involved in Libertarian Party of Florida, and then the National Committee in 2016. Eventually became the chair of LP Florida for about 4 years, and now I serve on my 10th year. I was on the LNC, became the chair back in February of last year. And so it's been almost a year. It'll be a year on the 3rd of February, my daughter's birthday. And yeah, a lot's changed over the last, 14 years that I've been involved in libertarianism and in the party. I guess since 2012, I was officially a party voter. And then 14, yeah, I was a member. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. And in my day job, my in my real life that pays the bills, I'm a Wendy's franchisee, and we run 12 Wendy's franchise stores across 3 different states: Florida, Virginia, and North Carolina. We have a movie theater in Tavernier, the Island Grill restaurant in Isla Morada, and a Dairy Queen. So plenty to keep me busy. I'm also on the board of the Key West Greater Chamber of Commerce, and I also do stuff in ham radio and emergency communications for my community. So I got my hands in a lot of cookie jars. I do a hell of a
You do.
lot. I've got a lot of different interests. It's always been one thing about me is I like different things. Kind of put the pieces together, and yeah, I mean it's been a crazy ride the past 14 years, both professionally, personally, as a human being. I got a lot of, life lessons and stories and different paths I went down, growing up as a young man. I mean, I was a big fan of Neil Strauss back in the day. I was a part of his Society 100 for those who know the game. Big fan of Elliot Holst, the Hodge twins growing up. So yeah, I mean, it's been a diverse, really fun, interesting life, and it's brought me to some really crazy, interesting places. So, and it brings me here. So,
Yeah. Dude, you've been everywhere, you've done it all. I do appreciate you're a big Second Amendment advocate too. I think we're in a couple firearms, maybe groups together. But I definitely appreciate that. I didn't even know about the ham radio thing. That's dope. I've been trying to get into that myself a little bit. But yeah, you are a glutton for punishment, man. Doing that shit since 2016 with the Libertarian Party, that's a lot. You've been through a lot of ups and downs, and obviously there's been a lot of peaks and valleys through that whole time. Um, but I feel like, you know, you've grown a lot as a person through that. You've become kind of a lot more resilient and, outspoken in your opinion on how things you want to get done and your vision for what you'd like to see happen with the Libertarian Party. Um, and I definitely appreciate your voice in that. So I guess kind of taking it from there, wanted to talk a bit about like Machiavellianism because we're both, like I said, fans of Machiavelli and some of his work. Um, Kind of like
um,
look at what does that look like in modern politics, if applicable. Um, and because I feel like a lot of people that are in the more libertarian mindset or the collective of libertarianism, that's going to trigger so many people to say that. um, you know a lot of people feel like the two things aren't compatible, libertarianism or anarchism and Machiavellianism. um, but really, like, Machiavellianism is about realism. It's
mhm,
not about dishonesty, right? It's and libertarianism or anarchism is about consent. It's not about naivety or whatever. But when you frame it correctly, the two ideas are complementary. They're not contradictory at all. And I think a lot of people have a really hard time bridging the gap and saying, like, how can you think that way? Like, I'm an honest person. We have principles, right? Like, this is not about being a dishonest person. It's not about dishonesty at all. And you can totally buy into this without breaking your dishonesty, your honest, principles and all that. So how did you kind of first start down like this discovery of what that means? Like, when did you first like learn about, Machiavelli, and what made you interested, and how did that evolve into where you kind of like see political strategy today?
yeah, no, absolutely. I think perhaps even before I discovered Machiavelli's work, my father, he's a businessman. He came in from Egypt. He immigrated with his father back in the 60s. My grandfather ended up passing away from cancer upon coming here. My father grew up with his brother, single mother, his mom in New Jersey, and he grew up to become a very successful businessman and taught me a lot of life lessons about reality. And I think through business, you often see things in the way the world works. But through politics, you also see things even more so how the world works. And I think there's really three places a modern man can play in the battlefield of life in a real Machiavellian sense, a true Machiavellian sense, modern Machiavellian sense of the word. I think it's war, politics, and business, and maybe love too, to be honest. But I discovered, Machiavelli first through the works of Robert Greene. I actually had a buddy that introduced me to Robert Greene. He was showing me some of his books that he has, so I decided to pick up, 48 Laws of Power, and so I read it, and, through Robert Greene, I became really interested in some of the source material, so I read The Prince by Machiavelli, his most notorious work. It all made a lot of sense. I also read 50th Law by 50th Cent, which is also a great book. I mean, Robert Greene's got a lot of great works. One of my favorites of his is Laws of Human Nature, which I think every libertarian, anybody that's engaged in politics should read because politics is really all about human nature. There's, of
Mhm.
course, I think it's the 33 Strategies of War is another good one by Robert Greene. But in looking at the source material, I got into Machiavelli, and then I started to getting into a lot of the other works surrounding Machiavelli. One of them is James Durham's book, uh, Machiavellians, The Defenders of Liberty, which I think should be required reading for anybody interested in
Amazing book,
politics.
yeah, by
And
James Burnham, right?
one of the things that I appreciate about Machiavelli is, his views on the world. He looked at the world for what it was, not what, we'd like it to be, and he gets a bad rap for being, this sort of caricature of an evil person. People think of Machiavellianism as someone who will do anything to gain power because of they're just in it for the glory. They're just in it because they're devoid of morals and they're devoid of character. And these are evil people that should be shunned from society. But I would argue that these people already exist, and many of them probably haven't read Machiavelli or 48 Laws of Power or any of these books because that's how they naturally are. Um, Although I will say that Mussolini actually did his college thesis on Machiavelli. But if you go to Italy, a lot of people consider themselves Machiavelli. There's even statues of Machiavelli. There's a Machiavellian, schools that are named after him. They hold him in very high regard, and I think they have a more nuanced view of the figure. But where people get Machiavelli wrong, and why I really appreciate him, is I view him as this Promethean type figure. He stole fire from the political class and gave it to the people, and he exposed it through the prince. Um, he basically said, "Look, the ruling class isn't built on divine right or morality. They're all in it for power, and you're in it for power too. Matter of fact, we're all looking for power." A baby that's crying that wants his mother's milk or a toddler that just wants a toy and starts acting a certain way wants power. The blue-haired girl with nose rings who's on a leftist campus who's playing the victim is doing so for power. The soldier who's stomping his
Go
boot on
Kings my
somebody's neck.
ass.
Yeah. Everybody wants power, and I think that's something we in modern society have come to shun because we view power as something uncivilized or barbaric. But the matter of fact is, the government uses power every day. The boss wants power. The workers want power. People in relationships want power. People in life all search for more power, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have dominion and authority over your own life and wanting to have influence over others in order to achieve the things that you want to achieve because that's invariably going to happen through life. um
A lot of
and
people get that like, get it wrong where, like, they'll say, you know, that, people that, think in this way, like, they act as if there was no government, there still wouldn't be, or like, they act like we're like anti-hierarchy or anti-governance, but that is literally like not what this is. Like just because you don't have government doesn't mean you still don't have like these hierarchies and governance that would naturally evolve. Um, and all that. Like, some people do need to be told what to do,
Mhm.
and even the people who need to be told what to do, sometimes they're gonna have to tell somebody else what to do. This is just how life works. This is just the real world. And I think Machiavelli obviously could see that, but kind of like explained it in a way where people like felt like they were just, basically, uh not slaves, but you know what I'm saying? Like they were under the government. They did not feel like they had a say, in what was happening in the world. He was trying to bring that power back, um, and basically like push the idea of like we live in the real world, and these people, they control your life. And I don't know, I feel like I wrote down a quote, and you're probably familiar with this because you've read The Prince, obviously, but a lot of people haven't. So the quote was, "A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good."
Mm,
And what that basically is saying is, he's talking about people who always try to be morally upright, honest, merciful. Um, you know, their failure is inevitable. Like, you're
mhm,
not going to be able to uphold that standard forever. Um, but you're going to need to come to grips with the fact that people are not good. Like, and a lot of political systems operate in a way that assumes that everybody is going to be good if they get their way. Right? Like
right.
libertarianism,
If
especially, like
people
we have
just
this.
listened to me, everything would just go great, and or if we just lived under a perfect communist system where everybody shares and, there is no inequality and, goods and resources are evenly divided, then there will be no more hierarchy. Therefore, there will be no more there will be no more desire to conquer one another or to gain power and influence through one another if we just got rid of all forms of hierarchy. That's typically the collectivist belief, at least for some. Whoops, what did I
It's
just
like,
type?
we're not saying like abandon your values. What he's saying is like don't assume that others share your values, first of all, because they probably don't on a mass scale. And don't try to build systems that require universal goodness. That's also ridiculous. And I think libertarians kind of get stuck in that purity contest mentality. There's nothing wrong with being principled and based and all this stuff, but like our system in a lot of ways does require universal goodness if you want to live in a perfect world. But we don't live in a perfect world. So we're going to have to be a little understanding of that. And we also can't confuse moral intent with moral outcome. Like I feel like we get stuck, dude. Like we get so stuck arguing over yes, like no, we none of us want the government. All libertarians agree on 95% of everything. And really I do think it's the purity test that are our own worst enemy, that cause these massive rifts
Mm.
inside of our own little micro. I'm
So
gonna call it a microcosm because we're so small. But
Saul Alinsky said something really interesting, and he does quote Machiavelli a lot in Rules for Radicals. It's a really good book. I recommend people also read Rules for Radicals, because Saul Alinsky is also a purveyor of realpolitik. And he says that um, essentially, did the end justify the means? And he says that depending on what your means are, you should be able to use whatever your ends are. You use the appropriate amount of means, whatever that takes to get there. Does that mean you become corruptible? Well, are you not so willing to become corruptible for your people? In other words, are you willing to become corrupted on behalf of your people to get the thing done? And I think that was a really interesting sort of come to Jesus moment, for a lot of readers. I mean, his point being that those who are uncorruptible are the ones that really don't do anything. Uh, unfortunately, that's just the way the world is. Another way of putting it is nice guys finish last. And a lot of times in interpersonal relationships, women don't like the nice guys. A lot of time, the nice guys have something to hide. Maybe they're really terrible people, but they try to paper over it, try to be nice, try to be moral. Why doesn't she like me? I'm such a nice guy. I don't get it. I do everything right. I'm such a nice guy. They always go for the bad boys. They always go for the assholes. Yeah, because those guys are authentic. Because those
mm,
guys
Yeah.
give them something they
Well,
want, whatever it is. But
on that, libertarians are all like often like accused of losing because they refuse to compromise, right?
yeah,
And Machiavelli kind of has this idea of like that rigid virtue um is basically political suicide. So how do you balance ideological integrity with just the realities of the power, the people who run the world and run the states that don't share libertarian ethics?
that's a great question. There was an interview that Patrick Bet David had with Jo Jorgensen, who I respect. She was a presidential candidate. She was a vice presidential candidate to Harry Brown. She's been around the party for many decades. She's a college professor, smart woman. But she said something I fundamentally disagree with. One of the callers asked her, "What can I do if I want to if I want to get into politics?" And she said, "If you desire power, then I don't trust anybody who desires power to be in a position of power." And I thought that was a terrible answer. G. Edward Griffin, when I was a young man reading his works, he had a group called Freedom Force International, and he has a great essay if you go to freedomforceinternational.org, and he has a quote: "Impotentes defender libertatem non passant." Those without power cannot defend freedom. And I truly believe in that quote, and that stuck with me more than anything over the past, gosh, 14 years, is those without power cannot defend freedom. So if all we do is nothing, if we sit idle and say, I'm not going to participate, I don't trust anybody who is willing to become powerful because I don't trust them with power. If we say, I'm not willing to come to the table unless I get everything 100% my way. If we say, I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty or play hardball or use some of the rules of power, which may not be so moral or righteous or sexy, against my opponents because I don't want to become corruptible in the process of achieving my ideal world, then we are doomed to inhabit the world that we've let happen. It's like saying, I'm not going to own a firearm because I believe in the sanctity of, the other person, even though they want to rape my family and steal everything from me and X, Y, and Z. It's more morally righteous that I don't defend myself from this evil. So I'm not going to become powerful with this weapon because it is against what I believe is unrighteous. Nobody should be this powerful. It's just not reality. Even Jesus Christ said that when he comes back to the earth, he will not be bringing peace, he'll bring a sword. Does that mean I want everybody to take up arms and, risk throw their life away? Not necessarily. What I'm saying is that people need to become wise to the reality we live in, which includes universal truths on power and on human nature that, when properly understood, can help you navigate, identify, and use those structures, those levers and platforms of power to achieve what you want to in order to create an ideal world for ourselves and for our compatriots. um, because these things they exist, and there's people, there's groups, there's secret societies, there's governments that all understand these principles, and they're willing to use them, and they do regularly against us. And if we don't understand them, then we're only going to be victims in this game of power.
Yeah.
um, One of the
One
best
one of those
ways to lose is
principles
not to play.
well, one of those principles, that I think actually pushed Donald Trump over the finish line and caused him to win, um, it's maybe it's not even a principle, but it's just like a reality, and I think Machiavelli hints at this, but, um, he would have probably suggested that perception is power. So if you, to the general public, are perceived as, um, being the more powerful, successful person, then, you know, people will buy into that. Libertarians, a lot of times we say, "Who cares if we look crazy? We're right." You know what I mean? But, like, uh,
The
I
messenger is
kinda
just as
do feel
important
like
as the message.
yeah, and I feel like because we do attract a lot of people who, let's just say, do look the crazy part, no matter how base they are, no matter how aligned they are with, like, me and you and all this, I feel like I don't know, at least for myself, I feel like I got trapped in this thing where, like, we almost have to do narrative control
Yes.
because, and I feel terrible saying that because these are, like, my friends, right? But, like, I feel like it's very important to have narrative control because, as I said, perception is power. Like and you know what? I've seen it done, and you've seen it done, and I'm not going to name names, but we both know like prominent libertarians who claim a bunch of success in life, have none, but they're really good at talking about their success, and they have this really great fake it till you make it attitude. So everyone just believes them. And those people often come across as successful libertarians, right? Even if they don't really accomplish much.
Right.
It's all about how they pitch it to people. So,
I th
um,
I think one of the things that libertarians could learn from Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's a master at this, is crafting a narrative. And I think
mm,
Donald Trump, you know, he has a very enigmatic personality. I think the only person I could really, compare him to on the libertarian side would be John McAfee, who also had a very big personality, who was very enigmatic. Um
that's who I wanted on the ticket, by the way, back in
I
the day.
voted for John McAfee at one point. I actually had a really good experience. I was his wife bought me whiskey. We were hanging out in his, you know, he had like his own little room, and I had like Cirque du Soleil type people doing crazy stuff. I mean, it was wild. I mean, he put on
That's
a
sick,
great
dude.
show.
That's
But
awesome.
one of the things that libertarians can learn, especially in 2026, is how to craft a narrative. Because it's one thing to say, yeah, you know, on an XY chart, you know, inflation does this, that debt does this, and tariffs are, we pay for the tariffs, and yada yada. All those things are true. Everything we're right about, just about everything on a scientific, historical basis, we are correct. On a mathematic basis, we are correct. On a policy basis, we are correct. Where the rubber meets the road is being able to sell that in a narrative package to the American people. Javier Milei did a great job at this. The Libertarian Advances Party, and I was talking to some of his people. They were a party that was much like us. They were in a position, they were a minority party. All of a sudden, Javier Milei comes on the scene with his chainsaw, with his crazy hair. The guy is a tantric, I don't know, whatever. He, he's a rock star. He hates the state. He has his, he goes up on stage, afuera, afuera, Department of Education, afuera, Health and Human Services, afuera. And people loved it. And they saw this guy gets it. This guy is going to make a change. He's going to make a splash. And if you had somebody go up there and maybe they were a lot more dry and they were technically correct and, and whether or not you believe in global warming, it's like, oh, in 100 years from now, the sea levels are going to rise, well, da, 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 or we'll get rid of inflation. And, if you look at this chart, nobody really listens. But what Javier Milei did is he crafted a narrative around a person. He personified the message, and he created this hopefulness and this sexiness to liberty that people love because socialism had collapsed. People that weren't corrupt, that didn't benefit off the system, saw they were only getting poorer, and they were willing to try something out different. And it's working because the math behind the man is actually working in Argentina. Now you have libertarian parties popping up in Uruguay, all over Latin America, in Europe, in Asia. Um,
What
so
he did
one of
was
the
he
things,
humanized what our philosophy is. Like, he brought it to people who were actually suffering and gave them, like, a tangible answer, not just, like, you know what I mean? Moral talk about, ideas. Like, no, he gave solutions like, "Hey, we're struggling. Our inflation through the roof. It's insane. We can't survive like this. You guys aren't surviving like this. Our country is in bad shape. These are the answers." And, I think that, like, he was really able to relate to his own people. And I think that, like, one thing that libertarians do sometimes have a hard time with is, and I talk about this a lot on some of my shows sometimes, but, we have a hard time, like, um, coming across, or talking to normies. We have a really hard time talking to normal people, because once you take the red pill, you just can't, like, unsee it. And we see the world in a whole different and new way that everyone else just is completely. We have to remember, they're incapable of thinking that way. They've been trained and programmed to think a certain way. And, you know, with that, the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, they do actually speak to their people. They use moral language, you know, The Democrats call it DEI, but the Republicans have their own safety, equity, democracy, inclusion, right? Their
Mhm.
language that they use that makes it appeal to their people. So, how do libertarians um, counter the moralized authoritarianism without sounding callous or detached from human concerns? And I think that that's what Javier Milei did very, very well. But in America, I think it comes down to the messenger. We have the
Mhm.
message, it's the messenger. We need someone who can actually translate this in a way that people just get it. Spike did a really good job of this during Joe's campaign. I
He
love
really
Spike
did.
though. Yeah.
Spike was an amazing messenger. I just wanted to because you made a point is how do you bring the message to the people in a way that really resonates with them? There's a study that came out, and this is not anything that isn't this isn't really breaking news for me, but it's going around that the Telegraph did a study, or I guess they did a poll, which is technically a study, that Gen Z voters are not subscribing to the Republican or Democratic parties. They're going NPA. They're going independent. They're going third party. So, what does that tell us? What does that tell libertarians, and what should that be a message to those who are looking to engage constituents, especially the younger generations, politically? If you look at millennials and Gen Z, and the younger they get, the more this is true. The data states that institutional trust is at an all-time low. People don't believe in the system. They don't believe the government's out to protect them. They believe that the state is corrupt, that businesses are corrupt, that education's corrupt, that the media is corrupt, that all institutions, especially government, do not serve them. And uh, most young people aren't even participating in politics because they don't think they have a reason to, because they know it's not going to benefit them in any way. So, how do we appeal to these people? You look at Mamdani in New York City. He's an open socialist. He won because of the Gen Z vote. Majority of Gen Z voted for Mamdani. He promised them, "Look, I know life is hard. Your rent's up, so we're gonna make sure that they can't. We're gonna put freeze on rent. We're gonna open up government grocery stores because we know food's expensive. We're gonna make buses free." Now, is all this actually going to happen? It might bankrupt New York, and it'll probably fail, as we know as libertarians. How quickly we don't know when reality meets communist policies. And they've tried this in the past. New York's tried rent freezing, and it looks like they want to get rid of private property, or at least on paper, they're trying to change the relationship between people and their property. So we'll see what happens there. But the message resonated with Gen Z. So, what can libertarians do to resonate with our constituents? And I think the topics that we own are very clear. Our money is losing value. Grocery bills are getting higher. Every day it gets more expensive. People can't own homes. Healthcare is more expensive. Larry Sharp made a very good point. When people say, "Yeah, I want universal healthcare," we say, "Yeah, we want universal healthcare too. We want it in a private market, but yeah, we want universal healthcare. We want affordable healthcare. We want affordable housing. We want your dollar to go further." And the way that we express this message is the narrative that we build. And it does depend on the constituency, but it needs to be in a way, if you can rally the fear, the anger, the hopelessness, and provide hope in a very hopeless world. And I think the world is unfortunately becoming darker by the day, very rapidly, as a matter of fact. Um, if we can provide hope to all these questions, which quite frankly we can as libertarians because we do have the answers, um, then I believe that there is a libertarian narrative that can be crafted, but we are in competition now with the socialists. We are in competition now with this sort of right leaning nationalism that's sort of taking hold in every generation as well, because people are looking for answers. They're
Yeah.
out there. They want
And
to,
even
they're
worse is
looking at,
that we're in competition with ourselves, man. Like
yes.
we you know, we have the greatest we uphold the greatest philosophy known to man, right? But because of how passionate we are about this and our principles and libertarianism, um, we just fall into the purity tests. And I, I don't think that's avoidable because I see Democrats and Republicans, they have their own forms of purity tests too. Um, but I do think that like there's we hold ourselves back as a party and it almost gets to the point, and I'm like doing a lot of things to try to break through from this, obviously, but eventually it becomes like basically organizational paralysis. At some point, you're not doing anything because everyone's too busy arguing over. Like I had a communist on my show like a couple months ago, and she was talking about how the Communist Party they spent, 3 meetings straight arguing over resolutions, the names of resolutions, and I was like, you know, I made fun of her for, not having good audio equipment because she wasn't a capitalist, but, um, you know, I was like, you're not terribly different than the Libertarian Party, to be honest. We kinda do the same thing."
It is true,
Um
and it is true in all forms of politics. I don't think any party is necessarily exempt, but I think the Libertarian Party is so small that
Mhm.
the infighting becomes more obvious. And one of the
Yeah.
things that needs to happen in order for it to sort of be drowned out is for the party to grow. And in order
Mhm.
for the party to grow, it does need to be a bigger tent party. Because if we said, well, only anarcho capitalists, which I am, can be libertarians, well, you know, Javier Milei is an anarcho capitalist, and he's currently head of state in Argentina. Um, I'm sure most of his people are anarcho capitalists over there, but it wasn't necessarily the route that got him into power was through what we just talked about, the narrative, et cetera, and it grew his party, and now they're no longer a small party; they're now a major party in Argentina, and they had to come up with a cabinet, and they had to come up with professionalizing the party very quickly, and I could see the Libertarian Party going down the same path. Um, if something were to happen, if we get a governor or more heads of state throughout the world, because what people have to realize too is that the libertarian ideology is growing internationally. The Libertarian Party of the Czech Republic is actually a major party. The Libertarian Party of Georgia, Gerchi, has a member of parliament. There's libertarian parties all around the world with high degrees of electoral success at their national level because they don't have rigged systems that that make it difficult for third parties to even get on the ballot, let alone win, and much easier access for them. So the battle is getting libertarians engaged. Even for our own people, there needs to be a narrative because for libertarians in the United States, they need to rally behind a unifying narrative arc that unites all the libertarians. I think Ron Paul did a really good job of getting a lot of the libertarians of the time under one banner, which was the Ron Paul Revolution. Um,
This is
and
actually, like, where Machiavellianism kind of comes full circle with this conversation a bit, 'cause, Machiavellian libertarianism, um, is just about, refusing to build a freedom movement that only works if everyone is a perfect saint, right?
right,
Like, like, because like, libertarianism without realism, it collapses, and Machiavellianism without ethics becomes tyranny.
hmm
So, the synthesis of all that is voluntary systems that are designed for imperfect humans, and I'm an agorist, an anarchist. I am all about building alternative systems that work outside of the government. Our party has a different purpose, and not to talk too much about the Libertarian Party, but we already have. But
right,
um, like I
force of
do
habit,
think that it's important for us, if we're going to try to use this as a system to make the world a better and freer place, that we need to. I love Dennis Pratt here in New Hampshire. His famous saying is "Build, don't bitch." And we need to build a freedom movement that you know is for imperfect people, because not everyone's a saint. We're not everyone's going to get it. Everyone's got this. I kind of use a church analogy. I used to be like a missionary back in my early 20s, and I don't know, like some people, this might go over a lot of people's head, but um you know, there's some churches out there that will give you like a really soft message, like God is love and God wants you to love him. And, it's a very like, it's a happy, good positive message, I call that milk. But then there's other churches that really dive into the message of Christianity and explain it in context, and they go into the original language and they dive deep into the meanings of the Bible and stuff, and that would be meat. That would be the meat.
Mm,
So, a lot of people are getting milk or getting meat when they need milk. Does
mm.
that make sense? So,
No, I like that.
a lot of not everyone's going to grow on the same path, and we need to understand that. Like, we all went through this hoop. Everyone learns at a different pace. This is why we don't believe in the Department of Education, is because it's totally cruel to assume that every person of the same age group learns at the same pace. That is cruel. Like, everyone learns at a different pace, and in different ways. So to just confine everybody in the same age group to the same exact structure of learning, that's really cruel to their upbringing, right? So we kind of like should think about that a little bit from our perspective. There's ways that we can, you know what I'm saying.
I was gonna say, I think to expand on that, I would encourage listeners to really look into the life of Machiavelli. There's a good book. There's several good books on Machiavelli's life that I highly encourage people to read. The book by James Durham is a good book. There's also, I believe it's called Machiavelli's Smile, I think it's called, that goes into more of his interpersonal life and upbringing, which I thought was very fascinating. And so there's two schools of thought in Machiavellianism. One is the more classical view. The classical view is more of the modern term of Machiavellianism, that Machiavelli was this bad guy, that he, basically was the forefather of modern politics in the West in a bad sense, that he encouraged leaders to rule by force, and that, it really doesn't matter. What matters is the material world and the results. Then there's the more humanist view of Machiavellianism, which is what I described earlier, the Prometheus type view. And when you look at his life, you can kind of see how he might have gotten to that Promethean type view and why he wrote The Prince. Because Machiavelli, he was the secretary of Florence, Italy. It was a wealthy city state in Italy. And he would go and he would spend time with the King of France and, these different people all around Europe. And he was around power. And I think it was when I think France invaded Italy. Um, he sided with the Pope. France won, and the Florence city state went to the ruling class there. The secretary, or he lost his secretary position, and essentially, um, he was banished to the countryside for many years. Some of his students started a coup. And he was implicated falsely that he was involved. He was tortured for days. He survived. They let him go. That's when he decided to write The Prince. I think in his Machiavelli's frustration, in that anger, in that distilled, uh, he wanted something in life. He wanted to be important. He wanted to serve Florence, the republic for which he loved. He wanted the best for his people. He believed in freedom. He wanted a prosperous, he wanted a prosperous city. And he went through all that, and he wrote The Prince. And so even by his contemporaries, many of them thought that his work was evil and he was a bad person. But I really do truly believe that he wanted to show us the things that went into power, to see power. And as libertarians, when we actually go out there in the world, we will see true power. We'll see some real big dick swinging power, even our own communities, where you're up against like the Illuminati. It may not be the real Illuminati. It might just be at the city, state, or local level, but that power is there. So how do you navigate that
Sometimes the
structure?
sewer commission can basically be an Illuminati. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's true, dude. So I've seen
yeah.
it with my own eyes. I work. I have to see them
And
occasionally. It's
so,
terrible.
so if you look at the Prince and the discourses on Libe, and his other work, you read books like The Art of War. One of my favorites is The Craft of Power by R.G.H. Su, which is out of print. You can find it. It's about $100 on eBay. It's a fantastic book. I would highly recommend it. It's quoted often in 48 Laws of Power, and you can see where it directly impacted Robert Greene. Um, I recommend people give it a read. I think people should be reading about presidents and heads of state and how they navigated power. I know libertarians tend to detest presidents and people of power, but I think it's important to understand and learn how people ruled and and understand history and people of power and their lives and their situations. It's not always going to be one to one with our own situations, but a lot of times the mechanics are very similar. And I think the amount of people that can really understand how to play these games are really far and few and in between, to be quite honest, at the highest levels. But those that can, I think they'll find it really exhilarating and they can learn a lot, and use that to really help their people. So it's a course of study that I think is really important. And I think going back to the earlier conversation, milk versus meat, a lot of times people get the milk. Yeah, go out there, be peaceful. We're all libertarians. We're all about peace and love. Where I think the meat is, you know, okay, libertarianism is theory, Machiavellianism is application,
Hmm.
and you have to understand Machiavellianism in order to apply it. The socialists had the same thing. There's Marxists and there's Marxist Leninists. The difference between a Marxist and a Marxist Leninist is a Marxist believed in Marx. A Marxist Leninist followed Lenin, who basically said that you should not tell people you're a Marxist until you get into a position of power and then you rule. And so that's what the Marxist Leninists believe. And I think for libertarians, we need to adopt a form of libertarian Machiavellianism where, yes, you're libertarian, but you're also Machiavellian and you engage in the real world through the reality that exists and you understand the power structure and how to navigate it. You understand
Well,
human
yeah, that's the
nature.
thing is, like, you can be honest about your goals. Our goals are actually probably very popular with normal people because it benefits them, right? If you explain it to them in a way that they understand, and you can be consistent with your principles and not self-sabotage with, purity tests or,
Yes.
political theater, political cosplay is, like, what I like to say. But you should also, like, never assume that your enemies are going to restrain themselves. We have a really hard job to do. Um, and I think that Machiavelli kind of teaches libertarians how to survive power, one, but also libertarianism teaches Machiavellians where power must stop,
Yes.
right? So, um, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions there. I'm I'm really stoked to have had you on to kind of clear this up. And obviously, like I love talking about this stuff anyway. Um, but if you could, I guess you have a very important meeting to get to here soon. Kind of for the next couple minutes, I guess tell everyone how you feel Machiavellianism can be used. You know, not as like some official adopted strategy for the Libertarian Party, but as libertarians in the party or not, even agorists. How can we use this um, to push forward and to make the world a better place, a freer place?
I think the way that libertarians can read Machiavelli, and authors like him and actually practically apply it is number one to understand that power is not a dirty word. Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's, once said profit's not a dirty word, and I think power should not be a dirty word to libertarians, provided we use that power to essentially make the world a better place. That's our ultimate goal, is to see libertarianism through, to see a more prosperous society, to see a better world for our children, our compatriots, that we so desperately desire for ourselves. So that's I think the first lesson. The second lesson is to start adopting the mindset of realpolitik, which is essentially seeing the world for what it is, not for what we'd like it to be. Because when you look at places like the UN or the EU, when you look at Congress and you see all these resolutions and the language that they use and the rationale behind this war and that policy and this regulation, a Machiavellian mindset can help you deconstruct that to understand the greater uh, the real meaning behind the phrases, which is really we want the power in this situation. The Democratic platform back in the early 20th century actually called for sound money. They actually said they believe in a sound money policy. What they're really saying is you give us control of the money supply, then we get power. Because in practice, they took that power and they debased the dollar just as much as the Republicans did, but that was their policy. So I forget the movie, but you put on the glasses and you start to see all the propaganda. I think that is one of the elements of Machiavellianism that's very important. Real politic. Number three is Machiavelli in many of the more modern interpretations of his work and the people who follow him. Um, they talk about strategy and tactics. So strategy could be a mindset, it could be a goal, it could be human nature, understanding strategy in order to get
Strategy
something
support.
done. Tactics would be the actual tactic behind that. So understanding certain plays, right? Like in sports, you have different plays. There are certain plays available to you. Understand what the plays are because they will be used against you and you may employ them as well. So number four, I would say is, let's see here. I was going to say number four is understanding, and it probably ties into some of the earlier topics, but understanding human nature, understanding people. And this could be used in your own personal life. It could be used in interpersonal relationships with your boss, with people around you. Um, but people, how they work, how they think, um, demystifying uh, people, I guess would be another one. Maybe next time, if I ever come back on, I could pick a couple of different things specifically, topics we could go into, platforms and levers of power and how that practically applies to libertarians in the world. But
Uh,
really,
Honestly, man, like I think that libertarianism is the only serious, realistic counter strategy that's left. Um, there's not really a lot of other places to arrive at. Um, it's an uphill battle, man. We got a lot of work to do, and you're doing amazing work with the LNC, and I love the strategies you're putting forward to try to grow the party and make it more successful, raise money, and all of that. Uh, you're an awesome dude, and I really
thanks, man.
appreciate you, man. Everyone, Steve, where can people find you? Where can people follow you? And I guess
You can follow
plug
me
away.
on X, Steven Nekhaila. You can also find me on Facebook. Follow the Libertarian Party official pages. Go to lp.org. Sign up for our newsletter. It's free. And one last thing I want to leave with your audience, because I think it's pertinent, is build a life worth fighting for. Because at the end of the day, the most Machiavellian thing you could do is give yourself a reason to fight. If you build a family, a friend group, a successful career, build happiness in your own space, take ownership over your own life, you don't have to wait for the government to collapse tomorrow because a part of being a Machiavellian is being a free person and acting free and being free in your own day to day life and building an ideal world that you want to fight for. We don't want to wait till the government goes away to start building that because at that point it might be too late, or you might find that you've wasted time and it was really you all along that you needed to rely on to self actualize. So rely on yourself, build your community because real power comes from those around you, your connections, your soul. That's the first place to start, and then start building out from there.
Freedom for freedom, man. uh, Dude, I appreciate you so much for coming on. And it's not if, it's when. I'll definitely have you back on the show sometime, man. We'll talk. You will no longer be the chair of the party at that time. Maybe things will change again. Maybe it'll be another hill, maybe a valley. Either way, we'll talk about it. But thanks so much for coming on. I will drop you backstage real quick and close the show out, and I'll talk to you in a few minutes.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you having me on.
Coming from